Sounds good. Well, thanks, Dave, and I appreciate the opportunity. So yeah, my name's Dan Ovick. I'm going to talk a little bit about vulnerability management today, specifically more so gearing towards the small to medium-sized businesses. So today, a couple of the key areas that I'm hoping to cover is what is vulnerability management, what vulnerability management is not, where do we want to start, cover some automation, and then kind of the key piece of this too, leadership buy-in. But before we get started on that, just a brief introduction of myself. I'm currently a senior cybersecurity analyst in vulnerability management. I'm also a president of the Minnesota CVCISO local chapter. And there's my LinkedIn link as well for anybody that'd be interested in contacting if you have any questions afterwards. Quick little plug about the Minnesota local chapter. So it's part of the overall SecurityStudio CVCISO Academy program. And a lot of what I'm going to cover today is similar to the topics that we cover during those meetings on a monthly basis. So just a quick little plug for that. And then before we dive into the content, I believe we can do a poll. Is it too soon to do a poll, or can we do one now?
Sorry, my keyboard can be loud, so I mute myself. I just dropped your LinkedIn URL in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And you are totally in charge, so we can start with the poll for sure. Let's see how we do this.
All right, well, I'll put the question up here for the first poll question of what best describes vulnerability management. Now, there's no real correct answer. I'm more so curious on what other people's thoughts are when they think of vulnerability management. I have my opinions, but I'm curious to see what other people think.
You know what? I think I did something wrong because it is not letting me launch it. So we will pull an audible.
All right.
And type your answer in the chat, and we'll be unofficial on it. But what describes vulnerability management? A is patch management. B is device hardening. C, risk management. Or D, everything is on fire. We're getting a lot of C's. I thought there'd be more D's.
I know. That was my thought. No, I'm just kidding. That's not. Some days it seems like it is.
Oh, no, there we go. Mike picks a D.
Perfect.
And some people picked A and C, or A through C.
Awesome. All right. Well, looks like so. Yeah. So I liken it most to risk management. Like I said, there's no real right answer here. I mean, vulnerability management is made up of so many other things, which is what we'll talk a little bit about here today. But I just look at it as risk management. When you have a lot of different vulnerabilities that you're needing to address on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, really being able to pick and prioritize what you need to tackle is risk management. So let's start here kind of covering what vulnerability management is. And most simply, it's a weakness. Weakness in software, in hardware, can even be something physical in the building, such as an unlocked door or open window. Again, risk management, prioritization is key with vulnerability management. I just know so many times when I've worked in vulnerability management and looked at all the numbers or talked to other people where it's like they get the initial scan results from the vulnerability scans, and it's overwhelming. There's so many, it's crazy. And I'll cover some numbers here later on in the presentation too that are pretty mind-blowing. Patch management as well, making sure that all those vulnerabilities, especially after Patch Tuesday, so if you're a Microsoft shop, the Microsoft OS patches and Adobe, some of the third-party applications out there, making sure that those are getting patched and staying up to date. Security OS controls. So a lot of what I liken this to is like your CIS benchmarks for your workstations, for your servers, and making sure that the local settings and configuration controls on those devices are set and managed, right? Group policy is what comes to mind a lot of times for this, is making sure that when our devices are getting deployed, that they're starting from a secure starting point. And then asset inventory. I always, asset inventory is key for vulnerability management. It's pretty tough to scan devices for vulnerabilities and then also go and find those devices to remediate vulnerabilities if you don't know that they're there. So starting off with a good asset inventory and making sure that it's staying up to date and accurate is key. All right, if it's not too soon, we'll do another poll. So this one, I don't know if the polls work in the webinar here, so I can just,
Let's
it's just
just
true or false. Okay,
let's just say that it's not.
all right.
And so all vulnerabilities can be remediated via patch, true or false. Um, the falses are rolling in. We don't have a true yet.
Come on, somebody's got to pick true, right? I mean, all the vulnerabilities is just patching.
Andy, we can have you do it true.
I'm in.
Sweet, we got one. All right, so yes, everybody is correct. The answer is false, except for Andy. Everybody else got it right. So no, definitely not. There's definitely some configurations. Again, if we're just looking at vulnerabilities as just a weakness, it could be a weakness anywhere within the ecosystem of your company, right? It doesn't have to be even technology necessarily. All right. So covering what vulnerability management is not, like we just covered, just patching everything. That is not vulnerability management. There's more to it. Again, risk management, patch management, asset inventory. I did have to find a space to throw in a Lord of the Rings meme because it's like
Nice.
one of the best TV series ever. So one does not simply patch all vulnerabilities, right? We have to have a little more to it than that. Another thing that I run into is it's just Microsoft stuff, right? It's just the OS patches. I can just go click update all in the Windows settings, and I'm good to go, right? Or even simply, it's only software or operating systems. This is another common thing that I run into, especially in the IT space, where it's just, well, again, where's that patch, or what app do I need to update? And it can go back to, I think somebody put it in chat that there's configuration related vulnerabilities as well. So if you talk about some protocols, for example, having, hopefully not, but having TLS 1.0 or TLS 1.1, something like that enabled in your system, there's no patch for that. And yes, it's kind of OS related to an extent, but it's a configuration change that needs to take place. All right. Before we move on to the next section, I know we're moving a little fast with the polls. I feel like I put all like three of them right away in the beginning. So
you kind of front loaded them there, buddy.
I know. I'm gonna have to. I'll do better next time.
I got to catch up to you. Okay. No. It's all good. All good. Okay, so what should we do? Oh, and actually, if I can do the ADHD moment, going back to what you were talking about earlier, on asset inventory, we actually had a presentation. Well, the line is you can't protect what you don't know that you have. So, and we're actually covering that last night in another presentation. So it totally starts there. Because the one that you may miss um, could end up being the biggest attack vector that you have, and you
Yeah.
never would have seen it coming. So, okay, sorry, just wanted to
No,
throw that out there. Okay,
absolutely.
um, okay, what should we do first prior to scanning the environment for vulnerabilities. Our options are A, policy creation, B, patch schedule creation, C, asset inventory, and D, reporting. And the clue is, what should we do first? Again, A, policy creation, B, patch schedule creation, C, asset inventory, or D, reporting. Um, got a C, got some C's, got some A's.
Jordan, you can't select all of them.
Yeah,
I
it's
see
almost
that.
like he thinks we don't see his name
Right.
on
It's just
those.
like A and then a B and then a C. That's kind of cheating. Uh, but it seems like, yeah, we do have a pretty 50-50 split here. So um, I always did lean towards asset inventory. However, the real correct answer is policy creation. I'll cover this a little bit later, talking about one of those lines out there in the industry, right? When it comes to policy, is it's pretty tough to play the game of information security if you don't know the rules to those games, right? Give credit to Evan Francine on that one. But yes, we need to be able to have not only just know how we need to do vulnerability management or where to start, but also making sure that we have the buy-in from the organization.
And
Okay,
like you
so
said, and like you said, it establishes what the rules of the game are, so everybody understands them equally.
right, 100%. And then there's hopefully no surprises when the vulnerabilities start trickling through and teams start getting some of those reports. They should know ahead of time. The policy should help kind of dictate that. And we'll cover a little bit more of what we can add in the policies. But again, so now with vulnerability management, where do we want to start if we don't have any sort of vulnerability management program, or maybe we have a tool in the environment for scanning, but we don't have any formal program around it? What do we want to do? So again, a couple key things here: policy creation, asset inventory. I mean, I think with that last poll, pretty clear that that's the two biggest priorities, right? Need to know the rules of the game, and then we need to know what we're scanning. I mean, we can't really move further until we know what assets are in our environment and on the network. And then once we have those two things, we can start doing vulnerability scanning and then prioritization. And by all means, if anybody has any questions that they want to throw in chat, I'm trying to monitor it here. I'm sure Dave will let me know if anybody has any questions in there as well. But I didn't want this necessarily to just be me reading off of a PowerPoint slide. So if anybody has any questions, definitely happy to answer those as we're going
Yeah.
along here.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw what Andrew commented there.
Whatever, so yeah, whatever you do should be following from the policy, right? Yes, 100%. You want to be able to be in line with the policy and again, kind of what the organization wants or desires, right? If we have a vulnerability management program, we write up a policy, the organization, the leaders in the organization approve of that policy. And so now everybody's on the same page, right? Obviously, I think there's always going to be some gray area where there's going to be some changes or something that isn't 100% clear in the policy, and that's where you can bring it back to your leadership to have that discussion. But yeah, ultimately spot on there that we want to we know what to do because it's outlined in the policy and standard, really.
Yeah, and the only other thing I want to throw out there, just on the policies and to Andrew's point, is yeah, we're talking about vulnerability management here, but we would probably have a policy about asset inventory as well.
Yeah,
And we would want those in place so we're adhering to those. So then when we get to vulnerability management, we have our proverbial ducks in a row.
Yeah, 100%. Let's see another one here. What are the most important pieces to include in the policy? That is a great question, Jordan. That is a great question. Let's dive into that, shall we? So as I mentioned, policy standard creation, rules of the game. What are some key things that we might want to include in our policy? Remediation SLAs for vulnerabilities. What's our stance on critical vulnerabilities, high vulnerabilities, medium vulnerabilities? How quickly do we need those to be remediated? This doesn't have to necessarily be the same across the board. This could be broken out in between workstations and servers and any other technologies that are in the environment, right? I mean, it could be anything from IoT devices to mobile devices to servers, and even breaking it out into, let's say, external servers. All of those can have different SLAs or all the same SLAs. You know, it's if we want to have a shorter turnaround time for criticals across the board and we think it's achievable. I think that's one of the key things with SLAs too, is making sure that it is achievable. Let's say you're doing vulnerability management and you say all critical vulnerabilities should be remediated within 72 hours. Can our tools, can our teams conduct that, right? Can we get there in that time frame, or is it more on average? Is it 7 days? Is it 30 days? I know NIST and all the other frameworks have their recommendations. I think 7 to 30 days is a pretty, or 72 to 7 to 30 days for criticals seems to be the standard numbers out there. And so just, yeah, again, making sure though that it's achievable, because if you're always missing the mark, policy also helps hold others accountable. And if we can't hold ourselves accountable to, say, a 72-hour remediation of critical vulnerabilities, it's pretty tough to hold other teams accountable to it as well.
Hey, Dan, real quick.
Yeah.
Just for anybody that's interested, I just dropped a link in the chat to the template that FR Secure, the vulnerability management policy template. So if anybody's interested in one or looking at how they're, if you need one, or if you're just looking and want to see something for reference, that's available along with other policies and stuff that FR Secure has. It available at no cost. You know, you
Yeah.
can just you can freely download that, and that'll give things a little bit more context as well. So.
Yeah, definitely a great place to start. A kind of just a fill in the blanks type of thing and get your company data in there. You can obviously tweak it to fit the needs of your company as well. I'd recommend that, but great resource. So thanks for sharing that, Dave.
Yeah, and a lot better than trying to start from scratch.
Yeah, 100%. So what are some other things that we want to include in our policy? And I kind of clump policy and standard together. Really, the hierarchy, right, is you have policy, standard, and procedures for this. So whether you want to kind of have an all-encompassing documentation or break it down into first your high-level policy and then your standard. So I kind of lump these together. Just wanted to call that out. But another thing that we can include is who is responsible for performing remediation activities. When it comes to, say, servers or workstations, is it all one team? Is it multiple teams? If you have multiple teams that own servers, is it the server owners? When it comes to mobile devices, is it the users of those mobile devices to make sure those devices are getting up to date? Is it the team that manages, that manages the mobile device management, the MDM or MAM? So calling that out, making sure that the responsibilities are clearly outlined so that, again, there's no confusion when reports start getting sent out from the scans, making sure that everybody is on the same page. Can also include vulnerability scanning frequency. How often do we need to run scans? Do we need to run scans every year, every couple of years, every couple of months, daily? I would say to an extent, this can depend on the assets. Again, I'll cover a little bit more on prioritization, but what are some of the critical assets in your environment? What are your crown jewels that you're most concerned about? What would have the biggest impact to your organization if a vulnerability were to get exploited and a threat actor were to, for lack of a better term, hack into your equipment? Making sure that those are scanned more frequently than, say, maybe a phone or a workstation or an IoT thermostat. So making sure that we have that outlined. The scanning scope. So this can be what is in scope, what is out of scope. So for example, I have a lot of experience working in the healthcare industry, and medical devices are something that's not exactly something we want to be scanning on a regular basis. Kind of the thought is, or what can happen is if you scan a medical device that's critical for patient care, and kind of like a DOS or DDoS attack, right? Distributed denial of service or denial of service attack, that vulnerability scan could consume all the resources, the computing resources of that device, and just basically cause it to freeze or shut down. And if that device is being used for patient care, that's definitely not good in that situation. And so we want to make sure that that gets outlined in the policy or in the standard, and what is, again, leadership's and the organization's tolerance for that. And yeah, you beat me to it, Dave. I had linked the FR Secure Vuln Management template as well. So again, just a great resource for getting started. Again, if you don't know where to start, or just aren't sure how to, all the policy language that should be in there, a really good resource. And there's a lot more policies and templates on that website as well.
Awesome. Hey, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if you go back one slide, are you, could you share like how all of these kind of came together at your work from like a top level, just to give it some context?
Yeah. So as far as where I work, just kind of how these particular pieces came about, or just the policy and standard in general.
Well, when you started there, was all of this in place already?
At a high level, I think a lot of it was in place. It was more so as, and this is the thing too, right? Everything is so dynamic in cybersecurity and in technology, right? And so I think over time, we just had to change the scope of the policy. For example, as time went on, we started hosting more and more web applications. And so making sure that web applications are in the scope of policy, that yes, we need to scan these, and here's our SLAs for vulnerability remediation. So when I first started, there definitely was some of this already in place. It's just kind of as the program matured and changed over time, the policies and standards adapted to meet those changes.
So it just evolved kind of organically based on quote unquote lessons learned as it matured. And then did you also see new items come into that needed to be added that got introduced to the environment, sort of thing?
Um,
I'm
I don't
just
know about,
curious.
yeah, I don't know about new devices. A lot of them, I mean, the web applications, right, as that, or maybe APIs could be another example of
Mhm.
a newer technology that's getting leveraged more and more just in general, right? Not even where I work necessarily. But yeah, it's, you have your baseline, and then as the needs of the organization change, we would make sure that the policy would get updated to kind of match the requirements that we were needing to meet.
Gotcha.
So
Cool.
hopefully
No,
that answers your
appreciate it.
question.
Yeah, you're just trying to take what you have on the slide and kind of apply it to your real world environment that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. And it really just stems from, again, what are the needs of the organization, what technologies are out there. And again, that's going to, so we have policy creation is where we start, right? Asset inventory second, but part of the policy or the standards is knowing what technologies are out there, right? So that's kind of part of the asset inventory. So some of these may be kind of done hand in hand, or you start high level and then you work your way and get it to be a little bit more, throughout the next year, make it a little bit more detailed or a little bit more tailored to your environment.
Sure. No, dude, that's perfect, and I appreciate it. And actually, I'm going to drop in the chat a link to the asset management policy template that's available as well from FR Security at no cost. We do have a question from Andrew. How are we defining SMB for this presentation? I'd appreciate the context.
Yeah, are you, and this might take a second, Andrew, but are you kind of looking, when you say define SMB, are you talking employee size, asset size? When you're looking for, as far as defining it goes, if you could just share a little bit more context on that, that would be appreciated. I mean, and ultimately, okay, you tell me. So ultimately, what I didn't necessarily write this up or kind of have in the context as far as like, okay, this is for 100 devices or less. One of the things that we can kind of get into a little bit, I mean, is again the execution of vulnerability management, right? So for example, when we're talking about an asset inventory, if you're a company of 5 employees, a spreadsheet's probably going to do just fine, right, for that asset inventory. I'll pull up the asset inventory slide here. But if you're larger, let's say you have 1,000 devices, you might need to find a, some sort of CMDB or asset discovery tool or something to that effect. Maybe it's just going around and physically assessing the assets from time to time. But I really just wanted to cover what would be the key areas of vulnerability management that we'd want to work on. Specifically, this is again based off of conversations that I've had recently in the local chapters here, where it's so overwhelming. Again, the numbers, right? And so how do we go from starting a program to scanning? And if we haven't done vulnerability management in the past at this organization, right, those numbers very well could be large. So how do we kind of, I think I put it in the description for the presentation or for the webinar here, but how do you eat that elephant one bite at a time, right? And making sure, so that's kind of what I wanted to cover. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah. And helps out a little bit there.
No, I think it does. And just to throw it out there, because we'll mention FR Secure multiple times, and those templates, FR Secure defines small, medium, kind of like as she said, where it could be devices or people. It would be defined as based on people, 50 to 2,500 people. And then you can kind of say, all right, on average, would one person have 3 devices that fall under there? And then you can kind of do the math from there. But if that gives you any sort of helpful benchmark for what Dan's talking about on foundationally building out the program. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks for that, Dave, as well. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
All right, so asset inventory. I mean, I think we've talked quite a bit about this already. I just kind of threw out some different examples of what to maybe think about or include when it comes to that. Desktops, laptops, servers, Microsoft apps, third-party apps. I kind of categorize those differently because they're somewhat managed differently. IoT devices, mobile devices, network devices. I mean, and it goes on and on, right? And there's so many different, just networking devices alone, right? I mean, we have access points, we have switches, we have routers, we have an ad hoc router that somebody brought from home and plugged into the network. I mean, making sure that we're looking for that sort of thing and finding those and hopefully getting them kicked off the network in that instance. But just again, keeping track of all of those and knowing what should be there, and what really then also helps knowing what shouldn't be there, right? Because in vulnerability management, one of the other things that really helps, and I think I have this on a later slide, but one of the other things that really helps is limiting your technologies, making sure that you only have what is necessary to perform your work to perform successful vulnerability management program, right? Cloud services, another asset type. Absolutely. Your cloud services. You could even include, to an extent, SaaS services, understanding the web of third parties that are involved. I mean, they're all threat vectors, right? And just making sure that we are tracking those 100% is definitely what leads to having a more successful vulnerability management program. So once we have the policy creation, the standard creation, we know what assets are in the environment. Really comes down to vulnerability scanning. I don't want to touch on this as much as, I mean, vulnerability scan is running a vulnerability scan. I did throw out just a couple examples of some more known commercial ones, and then I threw in a couple open source ones as well, just because some of the mainstream vendors, can be pretty expensive. And so if you're talking about scanning a smaller environment, say 10 devices, Nmap or ZenMap may be a good application to utilize, at least for the beginning, to get it working. So what I do want to cover a little bit more in depth is the prioritization. Again, this is one of the key areas where we got the scan result. Maybe we engaged a third party to do a vulnerability scan for us, and they shared the report, and they're going to scan once a month, and then they're going to share the report with us, and our job is to try to get it fixed, right? Well, those initial reports tend to be relatively large. I think I put in the notes of the webinar, when I first started in vulnerability management, the company that I started at, we in the first year achieved, I believe it was an 80% reduction, right? So, and that was starting from like somewhere in the 5 million range of vulnerabilities, right? Working that down to 2 million or whatever that the math would be, right? And so working that down, getting those vulnerabilities remediated is it's overwhelming. So where do you start with such a large number, right? And so one of the things, an easy one, is really your external facing assets. What is the most likely to be targeted for vulnerability exploitation? And that's going to be your external facing assets. So making sure that, again, when you're going through the asset inventory process, those types of devices get flagged so that you're understanding, okay, I have 5 servers, or I got a web server that's external facing. Anybody in the world can hit this IP address or hit this web page or whatever it might be, making sure that those vulnerabilities get prioritized over anything else. It's you don't want to get buried by just the straight numbers, right? And we'll cover a few more things on what that looks like. But also your crown jewels, right? An example would be a database. If you house a ton of sensitive data, having that vulnerability exploited on your database would be pretty impactful to the business, right? Even if they don't encrypt it or ransom it, they would ransom it potentially by doing data exfiltration, making sure, again, that that's a priority. Again, if you're a retail service, making sure that your point of sale devices are prioritized, making sure if you have a website that you use for selling your products, making sure that the web servers, again, are targeted. Another thing that I like to call out too, because this really helps paint the picture when you're looking just from a number standpoint, right? So pick your top 5, it could even be top 3 critical vulnerabilities, right? And what I mean by this is Adobe is always a popular go-to application that has a lot of vulnerabilities, right? And it's utilized everywhere. And so if, let's say, you have let's say 10,000 Adobe related vulnerabilities, right? And 8,000 of them are critical out of a total of 90,000 vulnerabilities, right? Well, you just got rid of almost 10% of your vulnerability count just by targeting Adobe and getting Adobe updated, right? And so when I say targeting your top 5 critical vulnerabilities, that's what I'm talking about. You know, if your web browsers, if they're not automatically being updated, and we'll cover this a little bit in the automation section, making sure that your web browsers are getting updated and getting targeted, because they are definitely notorious for having vulnerabilities on a very regular basis. So putting that report together and just starting there, like, okay, hey, or look, there's 5 assets that haven't been patched in 3 years. Well, just OS patches alone, that's 12 times 3 is 36. Try to do math on the fly there. So you know, a decent amount of vulnerabilities, right? And especially when you're looking at critical and really wanting to prioritize, just targeting some of those numbers first, making sure that you get some of those out of the way. It's kind of what I look at it, right? Get rid of some of the noise so that you can really see where the key critical vulnerabilities are. Also, understand and determine what mitigating controls you have in place, if any, right? But this is another thing to keep in mind with vulnerability management is, let's say you have SMB version 1 is enabled on your servers. And, you know, that's a critical vulnerability. There's a lot of concerns, issues with that. But what if you have it blocked on the firewall? What if you have SMB traffic blocked on the firewall? Is it as big of a risk? It's still a risk, right? Because if somebody does get access to your environment and they could then try to exploit that vulnerability. But just understanding your environment or the environment of the customers, right? And saying, hey, what other mitigating controls do we have in place? This really comes in handy with ongoing vulnerability management, especially when you're talking about, you read in the news, right? Oh, Cisco has another critical vulnerability. Fortinet has another critical vulnerability. I mean, it's a pretty regular occurrence of critical vulnerabilities out there, but understanding your environment to the point where it's like, okay, yes, it's a critical vulnerability. However, I have X, Y, and Z in place that mitigates that vulnerability and just it makes it so it's not every critical vulnerability is an emergency. All right, getting close to the end here. I'm just going to cover real quick automation. We want to identify key opportunities for automation. And again, the benefit of this is we want to have the vulnerability scan, the patching and remediation, ideally automated, right? Be performed, vulnerability scan done after, and then hopefully have a clean report at the end of it, right? And so the more that can be automated, the better. There's all kinds of patching tools out there for this that can automate that, whether it's for operating systems or third-party patches. I think there's also, you know, like web browsers, for example, usually are set to automatically update, so that, you know, using those opportunities wherever you can. So again, called out operating system patches, web browsers, third-party app patches. Here's a little bit different, not necessarily patching related, but group policy, right? And also I'm just going to throw in their device images, making sure that all of our equipment devices are starting from a secure standpoint. If you utilize like golden images for devices, that's another area, making sure that those stay up to date, making sure that we're applying strong security controls to eliminate, so that when new devices get spun up, we're not having to then immediately go and remediate vulnerabilities. And also just from a little bit of experience, we continually monitor those automations, right? That's, again, the benefit of vulnerability scans. Automate the remediation, then do a vulnerability scan. If a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, say for Microsoft Edge, shows up in your vulnerability scan and it's supposed to automatically update, well, you can catch that with the vulnerability scan right away and then go back and determine, okay, hey, why is Microsoft Edge not automatically updating? What broke, right? And go ahead and take care of that. And then I had mentioned this already, but limiting hardware and software in the environment, it's not necessarily automation, but making sure that you don't always have unapproved software or unapproved assets getting into the environment, because that is, again, that's a risk that can introduce vulnerabilities. And like, you know, social media applications, right? You know, if they have vulnerabilities and you're telling somebody to go and update TikTok all the time on their phone or laptop, or especially if it's a company issued one, but just making sure that it's like, hey, we don't have this type of software on our equipment. And then it's just one less thing to have to go and monitor or manage.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh, before you go to the poll one, just out of curiosity in your environment, at work, how hard are you guys enforcing the limiting of software? And before you answer, like what I've run into is like you said, where say Google Chrome can have a ton of updates and patches and do what it wants at times when you try to update it, where I've worked with organizations that would just standardize what browser you could use.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just curious how that might parlay into your current work environment for context.
Yeah, so there's obviously one of the key things, right, is installing software will require admin account to start, right? So standard users don't have an admin account. Now, if people with admin accounts go and install software, that might be another story. But in general, that prevents a lot. There can be issues of people installing stuff in their user profile. So a good example of this that we ran into, let's say Firefox. And speaking of web browsers, right? We have two standard browsers. Firefox is not one of them, yet users can still install it because it doesn't require an admin prompt. Actually, more accurately, this was a fun one. You go to install Firefox, you get the elevated privileges prompt to type in an admin account. If you exit out or click no, Firefox still installed. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if that was specific to our environment or if that's just in general a bypass for Firefox. But that made it a little tricky because it's like, some people would look and validate, yeah, you can't install Firefox. You need an admin account for that. And if you're not paying attention, you exit out, it actually still installs in the background. And so going and actually blocking that specifically on the firewall was how we stopped that from happening. There's always going to be ways around, right? Every control that is put in place, there's probably a handful of ways around that control. So that's where continually monitoring. The vulnerability management tool that I use and am familiar with does a lot of software-based scanning as well. So it just looks and compiles an asset inventory for your software in your environment, which is really powerful because then it's like, well, there's just in the news here that earlier this week, WhatsApp, right? I think the U.S. government basically blocked WhatsApp from being installed on government-owned devices, owned and managed. And so that's a key indicator for me. Not threat intelligence, great to leverage threat intelligence. Not the scope of this conversation necessarily, but
Sure.
going and reacting, saying, oh, hey, the government's saying that we probably shouldn't have WhatsApp on our devices. Well, I'm going to go and do a search and make sure that I don't see it anywhere in our environment, and doing that. So there are definitely several technologies put in place to prevent that. As far as the hardware goes, there's some technologies in place, not as much as I would like to prevent that. But software, there's more controls, definitely.
Cool. No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, poll time. So this is a fun one and a fun metric, and I'll have another slide to go along with this here. But for the next poll here, I'll let Dave. I'll let you read it off because you got the.
Okay. And without Googling or Binging or DuckDuckGo type stuff, how many unique CVEs were released in 2024? Your options are A, 800, B, 40,000, C, 75,000, D, 8,000, or E, 300,000. Like
According to Jordan.
Jordan, yeah.
All right, so we got a lot of B and D, some C's.
Yeah, got or a lot from Mike, which is technically correct.
Yeah, that is very that's the most technical answer, is a lot. So 40,000, just a hair over 40,000 vulnerabilities, or CVEs, I should say, were released last year in 2024. And I know based off of, and I have a slide here that I'll show in a minute, based off of the trends of 2025, we are totally going to crush that 40,000 number here in 2025, and I'm sure in 2026 again. But I just like to throw that out there too, just from showing the value. And I have a talk about ROI here a little bit in the leadership buy-in, but that's a lot of vulnerabilities, right? And that's why it's important to have some form of a program for vulnerability management in place. So the last section here that I want to cover.
Hey, just real
Oh,
quick,
yeah, go ahead.
that 40,000 translates to 110 a day if there are no holidays and weekends and stuff like that. If you just take that, divide by 360, and not a leap year, just divide by 365. It's 110 a day. So yeah.
Yep. Right. And I think Microsoft's responsible for a really large chunk of those. They are uh, Patch Tuesday is my favorite day of the year, or sorry, month. Favorite day of the month. Oh man. All right. So talking a little bit about leadership buy-in. Again, this isn't in depth. This is just based off of conversations I've had, based off of my experience, and just some key things, again, really to get a program going. Maybe someday in the future, I'll do another presentation on diving more in depth, because there's definitely maturity levels for vulnerability management. We don't need to start at the top, because there's a lot that can be done here. But to start off for leadership buy-in, starting small, right? And we kind of covered some of the key prioritization areas. The way that I like to put it is we want to communicate the whole risk, right? We want to communicate that, hey, there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there. Hey, there are 40,000 unique CVEs, unique vulnerabilities called out every single year, or sorry, in 2024. It's going to be more and more as the years go on, but that's a lot of vulnerabilities, right? And so how do you communicate that? Again, just starting small, saying, hey, we are going to focus on our external facing, or hey, for all of our workstations, we have a lot of other security controls in place, and just making sure that you're not overwhelming leadership as well. Good metrics. We want to avoid too much of having just text or numbers. Utilize charts or graphs in there. I pulled this one here from cvedetails.com. And this is also where you can see here the 40,000 number of the number of CVEs released in, where did my mouse go here? 40,000, right? They're in 2024. And you can see the trends over time, right? So here's just a very, very simple metric that you can start throwing in there just so that people see context too, right? Because if you're going to leadership and saying, we got 90,000 vulnerabilities in the environment, that's a lot, but in comparison to, 90,000 in total, not unique, right? Like 30,000 are probably just Adobe related in general anyway. But making sure that context gets shared for sure. Jordan, how many are Adobe? Probably half. Adobe's always.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I dropped
No.
that link in the chat, but I totally went down Jordan's rabbit hole. And Adobe has 353 products and currently 6,510 total vulnerabilities.
Nice. Is that for 2025?
I just did vendor search.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, still that's plenty. And this chart here just looks like it started back in 2015. It's a lot. So again, going back to prioritization, start by just updating Adobe, and that'll probably make everything look way better. So Jordan, is software just getting crappier, or are we just getting better at discovering them? Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer necessarily. I would think it's both, right? I think we have more and more bug bounty programs and more people incentivized to go and find these. I also think vendors and companies out there are also wanting to get new releases of each application, right? And the quicker turnaround time we want to have those new features or new applications out there, the less time that we have to focus on security testing.
Yeah, and I think
And
I, I was just gonna say I think software in a lot of ways continues to get more complicated, which contributes to it as well.
absolutely, yeah, the complexity of it.
Yeah.
I remember somebody saying, what is it? Complexity is the enemy of security, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Um, Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to rabbit trail too much, but Andrew put in a comment there that vendors are getting better at addressing them. So yes, 100%. And one of the things, not to rabbit trail too hard here, but one of the things I always think about is, okay, all these vendors are always having vulnerabilities, right? So if you're like looking at a new tool, for example, and it's just like, oh, they have a history of having vulnerabilities on a monthly basis. If they're remediating the vulnerabilities on the same month and being not trying to cover it up, not trying to hide it, trying to be efficient and do what's best for the customers, I think that's pretty reputable or a pretty good sign for a company. Just a little side note there, but okay, we have 5 minutes left and I'm almost through. Uh, Give analogies. Again, when you're talking to leadership, right? Leaders don't like to hear all the tech talk and, saying that, well, if we got the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities remediated on all of our web applications and blah, 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 and we implement XYZ tool, really just giving analogies. One, for vulnerability management, there's two that I like for vulnerability management. One is I always liken vulnerabilities and vulnerability management to a house. What I do in vulnerability management is I'm always checking the locks, checking the windows, making sure that they're all locked and secured and closed, right? I might dive in deeper and look at the quality of the locks, right? Making sure that they are good quality locks. It's not something where hey, there's a universal key, aka admin with the password of 12345 that lets me into the house, right? That's what I like to do. I also like to just more of a fun one for Patch Tuesday. I always liken Patch Tuesday to a dump truck. That dump truck comes every month, dumps off a whole bunch of black dirt. You spent all month with a shovel spreading that black dirt around your yard, making sure it's all nice and taking good care. And you finally, after 30 days of hard work, you finally get that pile of dirt to be gone. You got it all spread out. And then that dump truck starts backing into your yard again and dumps off another load of dirt. So just some fun analogies, right? It just makes it make a little bit more sense to when you're presenting on this. Another thing to keep in mind, right, when we're talking to leaders is more and more vulnerability management is required for compliance, say like with HIPAA or PCI, right? They have requirements for a vulnerability management program. It's not something that we can just say no to because we want to accept the risk. We very well may need to have a vulnerability management program and have proof of that to remain compliant with whatever framework that we're trying to remain compliant with, or whatever compliance that we need to be compliant with. And then the last one here, communicating ROI. So how does vulnerability management save money, right? Vulnerability management doesn't necessarily make the company money, but it can definitely save money. So again, instead of just going and saying, hey, we need to remediate all vulnerabilities, we want to make sure that, again, let's say we're Netflix, right? And all of our streaming services are hosted on this group of servers. That's probably going to be one of the key areas that we want to focus on, right? Because we really want to make sure that our streaming service does not go down, and that because that's how we make money, right? So if all of those servers get encrypted all of a sudden because of an Adobe vulnerability, that should have been remediated a while ago. We can communicate that, right? So that it's not just hey, I need 5 people to go and patch servers all day long. Making sure that they understand like this is protecting, and we start again with those crown jewels for the company. So, all right, pretty much right at time. Does anybody have any other questions?
We are current with questions from the chat, so we are good.
Awesome.
I just wanted to add on what you had on all of those, which are excellent, excellent points. But that it all, by the time you're talking executive leadership, do it in the context of the business and risk to the business. Like you said, graphs help. Don't give a number of vulnerabilities, just how it can be impactful to how it can be impactful to the environment, like you said, where if streaming were to go away, the revenue stops.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. And like to Andy's point, if anybody here has questions or interest, wanting to learn more about the program that Dan and I originally met through, that he serves as president of the local chapter and everything, just feel free to ping Andy. And we'll be happy to help out, answer any questions. We're here for you guys, for you guys and gals. I gotta get better at that. But I think we're current there. Dan,
Awesome.
thank you very much. That was great.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, everybody. And like I said, too, if you ever have any other questions on vulnerability management, there's my LinkedIn. I know Dave put a link in the chat there earlier. So feel free to connect. I think Jordan can probably attest, probably, and Dave, too, can attest. If you ever get me started talking about vulnerability management, I tend to not shut up. So just be aware of that, I definitely enjoy talking about it. So just reach out.
Fair disclaimer. Cool. Okay. Well, we're at the hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap. And again, thanks for everybody for joining us, and thank you, Dan. Very much appreciated.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Cool.
Take
Take care.
care.